My name is Sophia Wood. I'm 28 years old, and I never imagined that pretending to be a quiet, shy girl for one evening would expose the darkest secrets of my boyfriend's family. You won't believe what happened when I walked into that house wearing my carefully chosen mask of innocence. They thought they could control me, manipulate me, mold me into exactly what they wanted. But by the end of that night, they discovered who was really in control. And let me tell you, the truth hit them like a freight train they never saw coming. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from. So you're probably wondering how a simple dinner with my boyfriend's parents turned into one of the most eye-opening experiences of my life. Well, let me take you back to where it all started. The moment I decided to become someone I wasn't just to see who they really were. This is the story of how I pretended to be a quiet, shy girl when I met my boyfriend's parents, and they had absolutely no idea what was coming. Before I dive into the details, make sure you hit that subscribe button, because this story takes twists you won't see coming. And drop a like if you've ever felt the need to hide your true self to protect yourself. Have you ever been underestimated by people who thought they knew you? Let me know in the comments, because trust me, you're going to relate to what happened next. Or botwando. The idea came to me 3 weeks before the dinner, sitting in my corner office overlooking downtown Manhattan, reviewing quarterly reports for the tech startup I'd built from scratch. My boyfriend, James Mitchell, had been talking about introducing me to his parents for months, and something in his voice always shifted when he mentioned them. A subtle tension, a careful choice of words, like he was walking on eggshells made of glass. I wanted to know if they would like me for who I truly was, or if they were the type of people who judged based on appearances, status, and how easily they could influence someone's life. So I made a decision that most people would call crazy, but I call strategic. I would dress down, tone down, and become the quietest, simplest version of myself I could imagine. I wanted to see past the polite smiles and rehearsed pleasantries that people wear like armor at first meetings. If they treated shy, simple Sophia with genuine kindness and respect, then I'd know James came from good people. But if they saw weakness as an opportunity, well, that would tell me everything I needed to know about the family I might one day be. The night before the dinner, I stood in front of my walk-in closet, filled with designer suits, elegant dresses, and the kind of clothes that screamed success. And I deliberately chose the opposite. A plain navy cardigan, simple jeans, minimal makeup, and I even practiced softening my voice, lowering my eyes, and nodding more than speaking. It felt like putting on a costume for a role I'd never auditioned for. But something deep in my gut told me this test was necessary, that pretending to be less would reveal who was willing to take advantage of that perceived vulnerability and who wasn't. The moment I stepped through the mahogany front door of the Mitchell family estate in Connecticut, I felt their eyes on me like searchlights scanning for weakness. James's mother, Patricia Mitchell, stood in the marble foyer wearing pearls that probably cost more than most people's cars. Her smile perfectly painted, but her eyes, those eyes were doing something entirely different. She looked me up and down in less than 3 seconds, and I watched her shoulders relax just slightly, as if she'd just confirmed something she'd been hoping for, something that made me safe in her carefully constructed world. "Oh, how lovely to finally meet you, dear," Patricia said, her voice dripping with a sweetness that felt rehearsed, practiced in front of mirrors until it sounded almost genuine. She took my hand in both of hers, but the grip was assessing, measuring, like she was checking the quality of fabric before deciding whether to buy it. James's father, Robert Mitchell, stood behind her with the same evaluating expression, nodding politely but saying nothing. And I noticed how James immediately straightened his posture, how his easy smile became slightly forced, how he transformed into a different version of himself in their presence. I played my part perfectly. I smiled shyly, spoke softly, answered their questions with just enough detail to seem polite but not confident, and I watched them exchange glances that said exactly what they were thinking. They saw someone they could work with, someone who wouldn't challenge them, someone who looked easy to guide, to influence, to control. And in that moment, standing in their pristine entryway with its crystal chandelier casting calculated light on everyone's faces, I knew my instinct had been right. This wasn't just a dinner, it was an audition for a role they'd already written, and they thought I'd be desperate enough to play it. The dining room was exactly what you'd expect from old money. A table that could seat 12, china so delicate it looked like it would shatter if you breathed too hard, and conversation that felt more like an interview than a family dinner. Patricia started with questions that seemed innocent enough on the surface, asking about my childhood, my family background, where I grew up. But there was a precision to her inquiries that made my skin prickle. She wasn't asking because she cared. She was gathering information, building a profile, searching for the kind of details that would tell her exactly how much influence she could have over my life. "So your parents, dear, what do they do?" she asked, delicately cutting her salmon into perfect geometric pieces. I told her my father worked in construction and my mother was a teacher, which was true, though I left out the part where my father now owned one of the largest construction firms in the tri-state area, and my mother had retired early because I'd made sure she never had to work another day in her life. If this story is resonating with you, make sure you're subscribed because what I discovered next will blow your mind. And hit that like button if you've ever had to hide parts of yourself to see someone's true colors. Patricia's eyes lit up at my answer, not with warmth, but with something that looked dangerously close to satisfaction, like I'd just confirmed exactly what she'd hoped to hear. The questions kept coming throughout dinner, each one dressed up as polite conversation but designed to probe for vulnerability. Did I have student loans? What neighborhood did I live in? Did I have any career ambitions, or was I content with simple work? Robert joined in occasionally, his questions more direct, asking what I did for a living with a tone that suggested he expected to hear something entry-level, something forgettable. I told them I worked in tech and left it vague, watching their faces relax even further, probably imagining me as some low-level administrative assistant who'd be grateful for their son's stability and their family's resources. They were building a picture of who they wanted me to be, and with every soft-spoken answer I gave, they painted me further into the corner they'd designed. The moment that changed everything happened so quietly that James didn't even notice it. We'd moved from the dining room to the sitting room for coffee, and I'd excused myself to use the restroom. But on my way back, I heard voices coming from the kitchen, Patricia's perfectly modulated tone speaking to James's younger sister, Caroline, who'd joined us for dinner. I stopped just outside the doorway, hidden by the angle of the wall, and that's when I heard Patricia say in a voice that dripped with calculated satisfaction, "At least this one won't demand much. She seems grateful just to be here." My blood went cold, but I didn't move, didn't breathe, just stood there in the shadows listening to them dissect me like I was a business transaction they were considering. Caroline laughed, a sharp sound that had nothing warm in it, and replied, "James finally found someone who won't challenge the family dynamic. Mother, you must be thrilled. The way they spoke about me, about their own son, like we were pieces on a chessboard they were arranging, like my purpose was to fit into their predetermined plan rather than be an actual person with thoughts, dreams, and a voice of my own." That single overheard comment stripped away any remaining doubt I had about what this family wanted. They didn't want a daughter-in-law. They wanted someone compliant, someone manageable, someone who would slot neatly into the space they'd carved out without asking questions or disrupting their carefully maintained control. I stood there for another 30 seconds, letting the truth of who these people were sink into my bones, and I made a decision right then that the mask would stay on a little longer. They wanted to see me as easy to manage. Fine, I'd let them believe it, right up until the moment I showed them exactly who they'd been underestimating. I walked back into that sitting room with my shy smile perfectly intact, but inside, my mind was racing, connecting dots I hadn't even known were there until that moment. As I sat down next to James on the antique sofa, Patricia immediately launched into what seemed like helpful suggestions about my future. Had I considered going back to school, perhaps for something practical like nursing or teaching, something that would give me stable hours for when James and I had children? The way she said it wasn't a question, it was a blueprint she was laying out. A life she'd already designed where I'd be busy enough to stay out of family business, but present enough to produce the grandchildren she clearly had scheduled in her mental planner. Robert chimed in with his own version of guidance, mentioning how their family friend owned a small marketing firm and might have an opening for an entry-level position if I was interested in building some experience. Every word was wrapped in concern, delivered with smiles that were supposed to make me feel cared for, but I could see through it now. They were already trying to steer my career, my education, my entire future into channels they could monitor and control. James sat there nodding along. And that's when I noticed something that made my heart ache. He didn't even realize what was happening, because this was normal to him. This was how his family had always operated, wrapping control in the language of love and making manipulation look like mentorship. The entire evening suddenly made horrible, perfect sense. The detailed questions about my background weren't about getting to know me. They were about assessing how much influence I'd already had from my own family, how independent my thinking was, how difficult it would be to reshape me into their ideal. They saw in shy Sophia a blank canvas, someone without strong opinions or established direction, someone they could guide toward becoming exactly what they needed. A daughter-in-law who wouldn't question, wouldn't challenge, wouldn't threaten the power structure they'd spent decades building. And as I sat there nodding politely at Patricia's suggestions about which volunteer organizations would be appropriate for me to join, I realized they weren't just planning my future. They were trying to eliminate any version of it that didn't serve their purposes. After coffee, Patricia suggested we take a walk through their garden, just the two of us, so we can get to know each other better, woman to woman. The May evening was cool, and she linked her arm through mine in a gesture that would have seemed motherly to anyone watching. But I could feel the calculation, the way she was literally trying to guide my physical direction as practice for guiding everything else. We walked past perfectly manicured rose bushes, and she started talking about how difficult it was to be part of the Mitchell family, how much pressure there was, how James needed someone who understood that family loyalty meant putting the family's needs above individual desires. The thing about our James, she said, her voice taking on that confidential tone people use when they're about to tell you something they want you to think is a secret, is that he's always been so sensitive, so easily influenced by the wrong people. She squeezed my arm gently, and I understood the message. She was warning me that if I became the wrong people, if I encouraged James to think independently or prioritize our relationship over family expectations, I would become a problem she'd need to solve. Before I continue with what happened next, make sure you hit that subscribe button because this family's tactics get even more disturbing. And drop a like if you've ever dealt with people who disguise control as concern. You're definitely not alone. She was framing her son's natural desire for autonomy as a weakness, something that needed to be managed, protected against. But then she shifted tactics. And this is where it got really insane. She started talking about how much they could help us, how they had connections that could open doors, how being part of the Mitchell family meant access to opportunities most people could only dream about. Of course, she added with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, family support works best when everyone understands how important it is to maintain certain standards, certain appearances, certain agreements about how things should be done. I nodded meekly, playing my role, but what I heard was crystal clear. Their help came with strings attached, strings that would tie me so tightly to their expectations that I'd never be able to move without their permission. And if I ever tried to cut those strings, they'd make sure I understood exactly what I'd be losing. When we returned from the garden, Patricia excused herself to check on dessert, and I mentioned needing to find the restroom again. Though really, I wanted a moment alone to process everything that had just happened. The Mitchell house was a maze of hallways and rooms that seemed designed to impress rather than comfort. And as I walked down the corridor toward the bathroom, I heard voices coming from Robert's study. The door was slightly ajar, and I recognized James's voice immediately, tense in a way I'd never heard before, like he was defending himself against an accusation I couldn't yet hear. "She's perfect, Dad. Exactly what you and Mom said I should look for. She's quiet, she doesn't have complicated career ambitions, and she actually listens when people talk to her." James's words hit me like a physical blow, not because he was wrong about the version of me I'd shown them, but because I could hear the exhaustion in his voice, the resignation, like he was checking boxes on a list someone else had written. Robert's response was even worse, a low chuckle followed by, "Good, son, very good. This one won't give you the problems that last girl caused, always questioning family decisions, always wanting to be involved in things that weren't her concern. You've learned well." I stood frozen in that hallway, my hand pressed against the wall to steady myself, as the conversation continued. Patricia had apparently joined them, and her voice carried that satisfied purr I was beginning to hate. "She's malleable, Robert, truly malleable. I could see it in her eyes, that eagerness to please, that desire to be accepted. We can work with this one. Guide her properly, make sure she understands what's expected." They were talking about me like I was a project, like I was something they were molding rather than someone they were welcoming. And the worst part was realizing that James had been conditioned his entire life to think this was normal, that his parents' approval was worth sacrificing his partner's autonomy for. That love meant compliance rather than partnership. I didn't confront them, not yet. Instead, I composed myself, fixed my shy smile back in place, and returned to the living room where Caroline was scrolling through her phone with the bored expression of someone who'd sat through this performance too many times before. When James emerged from the study a few minutes later, I saw him differently now, not as the confident, funny man I'd fallen in love with over the past year, but as someone who'd been shaped by years of subtle manipulation, someone who'd learned that peace in his family came from surrender, that love was conditional on obedience, that his own desires mattered less than maintaining the Mitchell family image. Throughout the rest of the evening, I started noticing things I'd missed before, the way James automatically deferred to his father's opinion, even about topics he knew more about, the way he carefully monitored his mother's reactions before expressing any emotion, the way he'd transformed from the man who laughed easily and dreamed boldly into someone smaller, quieter, more controlled. This wasn't just about them trying to control me. I was seeing the evidence of a lifetime of control that had already been exerted on their son, and my heart broke for him even as my anger at them grew hotter and sharper. Patricia brought out dessert, some elaborate French pastry that probably cost more than most people's weekly groceries, and as she served it, she casually mentioned how wonderful it would be when James and I got engaged, how she'd already been thinking about venues, how a spring wedding would be lovely. If we planned it properly, with the right guidance, of course. She was literally planning my wedding without anyone having proposed, writing the script of my future without asking if I wanted the role. And I watched James nod along, like this was perfectly reasonable. That's when I understood the full scope of what I was dealing with. This wasn't a family that would eventually accept boundaries. This was a family that saw boundaries as challenges to overcome, and they'd been so successful at it that their own son didn't even recognize the cage he'd been living in his entire life. The moment that pushed me over the edge happened just as we were preparing to leave. Patricia pulled me aside one more time, her hand on my shoulder in that possessive way that made my skin crawl, and she said something that revealed just how far they were willing to go. "Sophia, dear, I hope you don't mind, but I took the liberty of mentioning you to Dr. Richardson. He's a wonderful therapist who works with young women on building confidence and finding their place in established families." Her smile was so sweet, so concerned, but the message was absolutely clear. She thought I needed to be fixed, adjusted, prepared to fit into their world, and she was already taking steps to make that happen without my consent. I felt something snap inside me, that last thread of patience that had been holding my performance together, but I kept my face neutral and just nodded. If you're still watching and this is making your blood boil like mine was, hit that subscribe button right now because what I'm about to do next is going to be so satisfying. And smash that like button if you think I was right to finally drop the act. I need to know you're with me on this, Patricia continued, completely oblivious to the storm building behind my quiet eyes, explaining how this therapist specialized in helping young women adjust their expectations and understand their role in supporting successful families. And I realized she wasn't just trying to control my future. She was trying to reprogram my entire sense of self. That's when Robert joined us, placing his hand on my other shoulder, effectively trapping me between them. And he said in that patronizing tone he'd perfected over decades, "We're so glad James found you, Sophia. You're exactly what this family needs right now. Someone who understands that sometimes the best way to be strong is to let others lead." They stood there, both of them touching me, smiling at me, and they had no idea that they weren't talking to a shy, malleable girl anymore. They were talking to someone who just decided that the performance was over, that the mask was coming off, and that they were about to discover exactly who they'd been underestimating for the past 4 hours. James and I finally got into his car, and as we pulled away from that pristine estate with its perfect gardens and its poisonous inhabitants, he turned to me with relief, written all over his face. "That went so well, Soph. They really liked you, I could tell. Mom already texted me saying how wonderful you are, how glad she is that I found someone so sweet and grounded." His happiness was genuine, and that made everything so much worse, because he genuinely couldn't see what I'd seen, couldn't hear what I'd heard, couldn't feel the manipulation that had been wrapped around both of us like invisible chains the entire evening. I looked at this man I loved, this brilliant software engineer who could solve complex coding problems in his sleep, but couldn't see the most obvious problem right in front of him, and I made a decision. "James, pull over," I said, my voice different now, stronger, clearer, no longer the soft whisper I'd been using all night. He looked confused but complied, pulling into a grocery store parking lot, and in the fluorescent glow of the streetlights, I let the mask fall completely. "I need to tell you something, and I need you to really listen, not as your parents' son, but as my partner, as someone who deserves to know the truth." For the next 30 minutes, sitting in that car, I told him everything. What I'd overheard, what his mother had said in the garden, what his father had implied, and most importantly, who I really was. I showed him pictures on my phone of my office, my company, the speaking engagements I'd done at tech conferences, the Forbes article that had featured my startup the previous year. I watched his face transform from confusion to disbelief to something that looked like grief as he realized that his parents hadn't liked me. They'd liked the idea of someone they thought they could control. And the real me, the successful, independent, strong-willed me, was exactly the kind of woman they'd trained him to avoid. The silence in that car was deafening after I finished talking. James sat there gripping the steering wheel even though the engine was off, his knuckles white, his breathing uneven, and I watched years of carefully constructed beliefs crumble in real time across his face. I thought they just wanted me to be happy," he finally whispered, his voice cracking on the last word. I thought all those suggestions, all that guidance, all those times they steered me away from people or jobs or decisions, I thought they were protecting me, not controlling me. Watching someone you love realize they've been manipulated their entire life is heartbreaking. And I reached over and took his hand, letting him process, letting him feel whatever he needed to feel. He started talking then, really talking, and stories poured out. How his last girlfriend had left him after meeting his parents, how his first choice of college had been redirected to the family alma mater, how his career path had been suggested until it became expected, how every major decision of his life had been filtered through what his parents thought was best. God, Sophia. They even convinced me that my best friend from high school was a bad influence because he encouraged me to take a year off and travel before college. I cut him off because they said it was the mature thing to do. We sat in that parking lot for hours, and together we made a plan. James wasn't ready to cut his parents off completely. That kind of awakening takes time, and I understood that. But he was ready to start setting boundaries, to start seeing their behavior for what it was, and most importantly, to stop letting their approval dictate his choices. I want to go back, he said suddenly, his jaw set in a way I'd never seen before. I want to go back there tomorrow, with you, the real you, and I want to watch their faces when they realize they can't manipulate us, that they don't get to write our story. And in that moment, I fell in love with him all over again. Not the version his parents had shaped, but the man he was choosing to become. The next afternoon, we drove back to that Connecticut estate. But this time, I was wearing one of my tailored business suits, my hair styled the way I normally wore it, my confidence visible in every step I took up that pristine walkway. Patricia opened the door with surprise written across her face. We hadn't announced we were coming, and clearly she wasn't expecting to see the polished, powerful version of me standing on her doorstep. Sophia? I almost didn't recognize you, dear. Is everything all right? Her tone was already shifting, uncertain, like she was trying to reconcile the shy girl from last night with the woman standing in front of her now. Everything's perfect, Patricia, I said, my voice clear and strong, no longer softened or diminished. James and I wanted to come back and have a real conversation with you and Robert, the kind where everyone's honest about who they are and what they want. I walked past her into the foyer without waiting for permission, and I heard her sharp intake of breath behind me, that first sign that her control was slipping. Robert emerged from his study, probably drawn by the unfamiliar tone in his wife's voice, and his face went through the same calculation: confusion, reassessment, concern. We sat in their formal living room, and I let them ask their questions first. Is this some kind of joke? Patricia asked, her voice tight with barely controlled anger. Did you lie to us yesterday? Pretend to be someone you're not? And that's when James spoke up, his voice steady in a way I'd never heard it around his parents before. No, Mom. Sophia showed you exactly what you wanted to see, and you revealed exactly who you are. She didn't lie. She just didn't volunteer information you never actually cared about. You weren't interested in knowing her. You were interested in controlling her. The look on Patricia's face was priceless, that perfect mask of maternal concern cracking to reveal the manipulation underneath. I opened my laptop and placed it on their expensive coffee table, the same table where we'd had dessert the night before, and I pulled up my company's website. This is Wood Technologies, I said calmly, watching their faces as they processed what they were seeing. I'm the founder and CEO. We're a cybersecurity firm that works with Fortune 500 companies, and last year we hit $32 million in revenue. That simple tech job you asked about, I was being polite. The small apartment you probably assumed I lived in, I own a penthouse in Manhattan and a beach house in the Hamptons that I bought with my own money. Not family money, not inherited wealth, mine. And Patricia's face had gone pale, but it wasn't admiration or respect I saw there. It was fury, the kind that comes from realizing you've been outsmarted, outplayed at your own game. So this was all some kind of test? She hissed, her carefully modulated voice finally showing its real edge. You came into our home and deceived us, made fools of us, made us think you were someone manageable? She stopped herself, but it was too late. The word was out there, hanging in the air like smoke. Manageable, I repeated softly. That's exactly what you wanted, isn't it? Not a daughter-in-law, not a partner for your son, someone manageable, someone you could control. Robert tried to recover, switching tactic, putting on that patronizing smile that probably worked in boardrooms. Now, Sophia, I think there's been a misunderstanding here. We were simply trying to help, to offer guidance to someone we thought might need it. But James cut him off, and I'd never been prouder of him than in that moment. Dad, I heard you yesterday. I heard you tell Mom that Sophia was malleable, that she wouldn't cause problems like my last girlfriend. I've spent my entire life thinking your control was love, but Sophia helped me see what it really is. You don't want me happy, you want me compliant. The room went silent, and I could see 30 years of carefully constructed family dynamics shattering like glass. Patricia stood up, her hands shaking with rage, and pointed at me like I was something contaminating her pristine home. You manipulative little, you came here deliberately to destroy this family, to turn our son against us, to ruin everything we've built. Her voice was rising, that perfect control finally breaking, and I stood to meet her at eye level. No, Patricia. I came here to see if you were genuine people who would treat someone with kindness, regardless of their status or success. You failed that test spectacularly. I didn't turn James against you. You did that yourself with decades of manipulation disguised as love, with control dressed up as guidance, with conditional acceptance that taught him his own desires didn't matter. I continued, my voice calm but firm, letting every word land with precision. You saw someone you thought was weak, and instead of lifting them up, you immediately started planning how to use that weakness, how to shape them, how to make them fit your predetermined mold. That says everything about who you are and nothing about who I am. And the saddest part? You've been doing this to James his entire life, and he's only just now starting to see it because someone finally showed him what real partnership looks like. Equal, respectful, supportive, not controlling. James stood beside me, and together we delivered the boundary they needed to hear. From now on, James said, his voice stronger than I'd ever heard it around them, Sophia and I make our own decisions about our relationship, our careers, our future. We'll welcome your presence in our lives if you can respect those boundaries, if you can interact with us as adults, instead of chess pieces you're trying to position. But if you can't do that, if you keep trying to manipulate, control, or guide us toward what you think is best, then we'll have to create distance until you understand that love doesn't come with strings attached. We left that house walking side by side, equal partners, and I never looked back at their shocked faces framed in that expensive doorway. 6 months have passed since that confrontation, and I want to tell you what happened because the ending might surprise you. James and his parents are slowly rebuilding their relationship, but it's different now. It's based on honesty instead of control, on respect instead of manipulation. Patricia actually called me 3 months ago and apologized. Really apologized, admitting that she'd spent so many years trying to protect her son that she'd forgotten to trust him to make his own choices. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't a fairy tale reconciliation, but it was real, and sometimes real is better than perfect. What I learned from this entire experience is that sometimes you need to make yourself small to see who will try to make you smaller and who will try to lift you up. Pretending to be quiet, shy, vulnerable, it wasn't about deception. It was about creating a space where people's true intentions could reveal themselves without the distraction of status, wealth, or power. And what I discovered that night changed everything, not just about James's family, but about how I understood the difference between people who love you for who you are and people who love the idea of who they can make you become. Being silent doesn't mean being weak. It means observing, listening, understanding before you act. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is let people underestimate you, because when you finally show them who you really are, the impact is unforgettable. James is in therapy now, working through years of learned behavior, and I'm right there supporting him because that's what real partnership looks like. Not control, not manipulation, just two people choosing each other every single day and defending that choice against anyone who tries to write a different story for us. After hearing my story, I want to know, what would you have done in my place? Would you have revealed yourself immediately, or would you have played the long game like I did? Do you think pretending to be someone else, even temporarily, is justified when you're trying to protect yourself from manipulation? I'm genuinely curious about your perspective, so let me know in the comments what you think about my approach. And here's something deeper to consider. Do you believe that people who try to control others can actually change? Or is Patricia's apology just another form of manipulation? Can someone who spent decades operating one way truly shift their mindset? Or will they always revert back when they think they can get away with it? Drop your thoughts below because I read every single comment, and I love hearing different perspectives on these complex family dynamics. If you want more stories like this, real experiences about navigating complicated relationships, standing up for yourself, and finding your power in unexpected ways, make sure you're subscribed and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload. Trust me, the next story I'm going to share involves a workplace betrayal that makes this family drama look tame, and you're going to want to hear how I handled that situation. Thank you so much for watching, for listening, and for being part of this community. I'll see you in the next video.